Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the last episode of the Writer's Mind podcast. All right, welcome to the final episode of the podcast. This was fairly short-lived, I guess, because this is only episode 67. I did not make it to episode 100. I was hoping to make it to episode 100 before it ended, when I started. Yeah, that was the goal, at least. So why am I ending the podcast, and what happens next? So I'm sure that is, if you are listening to this podcast, that's what you're asking. So let me first off talk about why I'm ending the podcast, and then later on I'll talk about what's next. So the reason I started the podcast was to try and bridge the gap between there is, story fundamentals and story theory, and then there is what I focus on heavily in my course, which is writing process, consistency, getting your drafts done. And I think those are two big skill set parts of writing that you have to cultivate and get good at. So you have to get good at understanding how a story works, and you have to get good at actually putting a story down onto the page pretty consistently. And then there was the third piece, which I wanted to cover with the podcast, which was, what are we writing about? And understanding that writing is not just about writing a fun story. Writing is about the exploration of ideas and beliefs and actions and how to live. And writing is about understanding meaning in life, and it is about developing a personal philosophy, and it is, about so much more than simply writing an entertaining story. And so through this podcast, I wanted to show that. And I think that, first off, I think I have done that to a certain extent, not all the way to the level that I would have wanted, which I will also talk about that in a moment. But I think I've done that. I think what I wanted this podcast to be was not to tell you what to think, but to tell you to think, and to, throw some ideas at you, not just about writing, but about life in general, and, talk about history, and talk about economics, and talk about just the different things that have been discussed over this podcast. And, I think that I'm going back right now and looking at Revolution of Consciousness, and looking at the CIA projects that we looked at, and talking about money and what writers get wrong about money, and all these different things I wanted to share with you guys, because I think what I find is that people don't actually think for themselves. They want to come in and they say, oh, I just want to write an adventure story, or I just want to write a thriller. And that's great, but it isn't actually getting to the core of writing, and getting to the core of why certain stories have stayed with us for thousands and thousands of years, and why you won't remember the movie you just watched 3 days later. It's because some stories have a deep meaning that they show through their story, and others do not. So I wanted to help you break into that and help you start your own journey of thinking for yourself more so. Now, I did not do this to its fullest potential. And because I did not do it to its fullest potential is part of the reason that I'm shutting this down, and let me explain. So one of the things I talk about in my course is focus, and I think I've also talked about it some on this podcast as well, which is that your focus is way more limited than you realize, because focus isn't just about how much work you're putting on a particular thing. Focus is also about headspace, right? When you're walking around just living your life, what are you thinking about? What are the tasks or projects that are occupying your mind? What are you thinking about? And when you understand that you can't actually think about that many things, and you can't really get your subconscious to focus on that many things, then you realize that you have to focus on one thing and then allow other things to sort of take a back seat. So For me, what I have found was, and this is something that happens again and again and again, it's where I get to a point where I feel like I'm doing this and I'm focusing on one thing, and then something comes up and my focus drifts, and then I say, oh man, why am I drifting my focus? I need to focus on this one thing, and then my focus drifts again, and it's this cycle. And I'm always trying to break it and try to watch out for it, but sometimes things happen. And sometimes I also feel like it feels like certain things are very important for a certain point, and then you really have to make a decision of, is this thing important enough to try and do, even if it's going to take away my focus from something else. So for me, this podcast took away my focus from the number one thing that I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel specifically, which is get people into my course. And now you're probably saying like, oh, your whole YouTube channel exists just to get people into your course. Like, that's so stupid, or you're just, here for the money. I'm trying to get people into my course because I realize that my course and the results that I'm getting inside of it have been extremely valuable and extremely helpful for the screenwriters that are in there. So not only is it about writing process, consistency, building that accountability, but it's also problem solving and story problem solving. And so the amount of growth that I've been able to see by talking with some of the writers in the course consistently on our group Zoom calls, I've been realizing, wow, like this is really the way to help writers grow, is to answer their questions and speak to them and have them inside the course. And so what I found though is I have hundreds of people in this course, but I'm only talking to a handful, maybe a dozen or so consistently, right? And this is a problem because I want to be investing in the people that have invested in this course, and not just momentarily, but for the long term. And so what has happened is I have allowed this podcast to take away my focus because I'm making 2 episodes a week. And when I'm also making those episodes, it also means that I want to be consistently engaging with all of these different interesting topics, because I want something to actually talk about when I come to an episode, like secret government projects or a book I'm reading, like a Carl Jung book I'm reading. And so what has happened is the podcast has sometimes suffered because I've been focusing on students in the course, and then the course has sometimes suffered because I've been focusing on reading a book for the podcast or searching for a good, interesting topic to speak on for the podcast. And so then what happens is I end up doing both of them halfway. So I'm quickly making podcast episodes, and I'm not helping as many people inside the course as I would want, because I have to go ahead and make podcast episodes and do other things. And so again and again, I have this sort of pull in multiple directions. And I need to consistently be facing this, because if I don't face it, then I'm never actually doing one thing strongly and well and focusing on that. And I think that is what I want to do, and I think the best way to do that is to continue to build the relationships that I already have built with people inside of the course. And I know that some of you that listen to this podcast are also inside the course, and thank you for doing both. You guys are awesome. In regards to this podcast, there was a lot more that I wanted to get to. There are some books here that I was very interested in reading, like Richard Dawkins's The Selfish Gene, which I've been told is fantastic, but haven't gotten to it. Carl Jung's Psychology and the Occult, I was going to read. This is a book called The Sovereign Individual, Mastering the Transition of the Information Age. I've been recommended this book by a few people. Again, haven't gotten around to reading it, and I wanted to read it and talk about it on the podcast. But I have to choose. And what I could do is stop everything else I'm doing with the course and focus solely on the podcast. That is one route that I could take. And honestly, if I did that, I believe that the podcast would continue to grow, and the Patreon would continue to grow, and there would be a lot of people that would gain a lot of value from it. But I think that both the podcast and the work that I'm doing in the course, both of them can work and be helpful to writers. But for me, I really can only do one 100%. And right now I feel like I'm doing both of them 50%. And so that is the biggest reason that I am ending the podcast. And so my final kind of note to you guys is always do your own thinking. I think first and foremost, and read, right? Like there was somebody that I follow, I think it's on Twitter, who said that when he started reading books, he realized that people who read consistently are living in another dimension. And I totally believe him, because when you are reading books, you are really able to, if you're reading the right books, you are really able to open your mind and leapfrog so much further and have a deeper understanding of philosophy and history and psychology and economics and worldview and all of these different things when you are reading. And when you are not reading, then you aren't actually, well, not that you're not growing necessarily, but it is definitely a new way that you could grow and grow much faster. I feel like I have always tried to consistently be reading something, and sometimes, of course, I'm doing that, and sometimes I'm not. But when I am reading, I very rarely finish a book and think, "Wow, I wasted my time reading that book." Especially with, if you keep your recommendations pretty top notch, then you can get some good stuff. Which I guess, while we're on the subject of recommendations, if I am going to be shutting down the course, I can probably give you guys a couple here. Let's see. Excuse me. Okay. I would definitely. What should you guys read? I think Flow was a very interesting book that really helped me in regards to focus. And not focus as much in the long term as much as this momentary focus, and how to actually get in a state where you're doing a lot of work quickly. Anything by Nassim Taleb. So Anti-Fragile, Skin in the Game is down here. What was the other one I read? I think it's somewhere over there. I read it on the podcast, so you should already know that you should be reading it. The Bitcoin Standard is a fantastic book. I absolutely recommend you read it. How to Win Friends and Influence People is also a great book. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is another fantastic book. I don't know if you can see that on there. And Atomic Habits is actually a book I talk about in my course that I definitely recommend you take a read of that as well. And there's so many more. I should go through more and give you guys a more comprehensive recommendations list. But be reading ultimately, and just don't read anything that isn't interesting to you. Honestly, that's one thing that I would actually advise, because you won't, if it's not interesting to you, you're not going to read it. Just like a story's purpose is not necessarily entertainment. That is, a story does not. Its focus is not necessarily to be entertaining, like a great story, a story with a philosophical point or philosophical idea, but it needs to be entertaining. So it has to be entertaining to serve the ultimate purpose, which is to convey a larger idea, give a view of the meaning of life, these sorts of things. In the same way, if you are reading something and it's not entertaining to you, you're just simply not going to get through it. So there's no reason for you to continue reading. So if you are constantly forcing yourself to get a few pages of reading done every day, then read a different book and read some fun stuff. I guarantee that if you get your mind working enough, there's a lot more things that you would be interested in than you realize. And take time to read and be a thinker. And if you're going to write more than some fun, entertaining popcorn movies, which are great, and I love fun, entertaining popcorn movies, and if you want to write that, do that. But if you want to write more, if you're trying to say something with your writing, then you need to be a thinker, so much so that you are willing to be the only one that thinks how you think. And you need to be somebody who does not accept narratives from other people at face value. And you want to be somebody who lets themselves come to their own conclusion. And some people are so offended by you wanting to come to your own conclusion, but that is just how it is. And you'll find that honestly, I feel like there's a lot of peace in doing that, in thinking things through for yourself, and examining what you're reading, examining what you're taking in, and also just looking at the world at face value and thinking about what you can and can't know from face value versus the different stories and analogies that you have been told about life, and dissecting what is what. I think all of that is extremely valuable to do. And so, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I enjoyed making it. I wanted an outlet to talk about interesting things more in a bit of a more relaxed environment than my videos or emails or live streams or whatever. So this is the final episode of the podcast, and I'm happy I did it. But what I need to do is continue to put the writers in my course first and seek them out and meet their needs and really help them grow, and not just in a way where they go through some of the course videos and they go on their way, but in a way where I have relationships with them and I help them through some of the nuanced hurdles that everybody faces in their writing journey. And that's what I want to commit to. And that's where I'll be. So I'll be around. Of course, I'm not going anywhere. But the podcast, as it is, will be going away. So I absolutely hope that you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you enjoyed every episode. And ultimately, be a thinker. Even if you go forward in life, and I'm sure some of you that are listening to this podcast will not be professional writers or don't even write. But no matter what, be a thinker, because no matter what, you can be a thinker. Examine the world around you in a way where you think critically about what you're being told, about the information that is coming towards you, and broaden your scope of the information that you take in. Listen to the stories of people that don't make sense to you. I think that's a big thing. That's it. I will see you guys over on the main channel. And I'll see you guys in the course for those of you that are inside of the course. So take care, and I hope you enjoyed the Writer's Mind podcast.